Hi, I'm Arthel Neville in New York. The state of Florida has rested their case against George Zimmerman.
The state will then announce that we will rest our case.
Okay.
Their final witnesses included members of Trayvon Martin's family. First up, Sabrina Fulton, Trayvon's mother.
That screaming or yelling, do you recognize that?
Yes.
And who do you recognize that to be, ma'am?
Trayvon Benjamin Martin.
She was followed by her other son, Jahvaris Fulton, who attempted to clarify his initial uncertainty regarding the 911 call.
You actually were not as certain that it was your brother's voice when you first heard it, though, correct?
Correct.
Matter of fact, you had talked to a reporter about whose voice it may have been, correct?
Yes.
And you told that reporter, Gio Benitez, on March 31st of 2012, that you weren't sure, correct?
Yes.
You said that, honestly, really haven't listened to it. I've heard it. I would think it was my brother, but I'm not completely positive. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
You'll have to answer out now.
Yes.
And then since that time of the interview, you had an opportunity, you said 8, possibly more times to listen to it?
Yes.
Do you now believe it's Trayvon Martin's voice yelling for help on the tape?
Yes.
Also, the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Trayvon Martin provided the results. Later, members of the defense team presented their argument for a judgment of acquittal.
Should the court not agree that a prima facie case of self-defense has been proven, and that to the extent that circumstantial evidence is being considered by this court as presented by the state, if you decide that that does in fact exclude any possibility of my client, any hypothesis of my client's innocence, if for some reason I've lost those two arguments, which I think the evidence supports that we should win. If we don't, then you have to look at whether or not this case should still move forward on a second-degree murder charge as to the issue of ill will and hatred.
Finally, the defense began presenting their case by calling to the stand George Zimmerman's mother and uncle giving testimony regarding the 911 call.
Do you know whose voice that was screaming in the background?
Yes, sir.
And whose voice was that?
My son, George.
And are you certain of that?
Because he's my son.
When I'm actually working the computer, my wife is watching the news. All what I did hear was the scream. A scream that it came immediately. Not only I just heard the scream, I felt the scream, like my nephew screaming for his life. It was a moment that I actually lived with me every moment that I heard the portion of that, because it was not the feeling of saying, oh, I heard Georgie. It was George screaming for his life.
29-year-old Zimmerman, a former neighborhood watch volunteer, is on trial for fatally shooting Trayvon Martin, an unarmed 17-year-old, last year. Zimmerman is pleading not guilty to second-degree murder, claiming he acted in self-defense. For gavel-to-gavel coverage of the trial, go to foxnews.com/Zimmerman. In New York, I'm Arthel Neville, Fox News.